So for this video, I don't really need notes. I really wanted to make a story about the old wise man. I want to give you a story about the old wise man that I talked to almost about a decade ago, but not quite. And this was a source I found during my search for answers through the internet, and I was looking up a lot of stuff here and there throughout the years, obviously because of my inner experience from early 2012. But I came across, and I can't give any names of any kind on here, okay? I'm not doing that. I just can't. I came across an old wise man, as I call him, from a place within the United States that had all, and this guy had all these websites about this small alien worshiping collective that they had. I say alien worshiping, they were not worshiping, they were trying to just be as aliens as possible within this great, experience this guy was offering people. So I noticed, there's all these websites. He had all these different websites. They're all linked to each other. His name, his email, his address was on every single page because he really wanted people. He really wanted somebody to just find that and give him a shout out. And I call him the old wise man. He sounds like the closest thing to my old wise man. I wish they weren't so involved in like a more political type of way. But despite all that, like he's what I consider to be one of the people that made it the farthest, the one out of the whole system escaping the false, awakening, false light, as I'm sure others have gotten through. He was the one that's like in those lyrics. He didn't make it to heaven, but he made it close, basically. And heaven here and now, obviously that was one of their biggest things. Obviously, like a lot of spiritual references to that. Heaven is only here and now. There is no geographical or eternal, place that. Well, eternity is its own thing within us. Within that, eternity is there. So let me just. It's all going to come to me as I start speaking about it. I don't care. I just wanted to speak about it. It's such a wonderful day, spring day, earlier March. I wanted to speak about it. Okay, so sometime within the past decade, it's been like 9 years almost, I think. I talked to this guy that I found all these websites about, and I just decided to call the number because he has his number on every single page on the websites. So I basically called him up, and I got some older guy. I was not expecting to have the voice he had. It was a real, like, I don't want to say nerdy, but it was almost like a nerdy, like Midwest, like Northwestern voice. Basically, just see it as that. So I'm not going to sit here and do an imitation of it either. But yeah, so he had this thing about like him having this great awakening, and this is all throughout his experience of life. It started with being young and breaking through, and this is like in the early 70s, breaking through on psilocybin, and he had this experience where he encountered this great divine celestial race of beings, these aliens, hyperdimensional, ultra evolved life forms, as they called them, and they basically shared a lot of secret information with him and basically opened the doors to him for just exploring all things esoteric and spiritual. And so over time this guy obviously had all these experiences with them, and he never got into full details about it. He just basically gave me the generalization of the experience like this, and he broke through and saw like this great celestial race of beings, and so I think the story goes, he had experimented many times with psilocybin mushrooms to encounter these beings, and he found like the right vibration, the right frequency, and he got there with them every single time. And he said they were with him all the time, like following him and a part of him and his everyday existence. And so I think at some point in time he said he had spent time in prison for being caught selling psilocybin mushrooms, and I guess they let him go after like a decade of like good behavior or something. And they said this was all throughout like the 80s pretty much. He was stuck in prison for having dealt with mushrooms. And so this guy apparently was, you know, he was a part of some group of like hippies from the throughout the 70s, and they were kind of like the I don't know what the word is, but like the people that were kind of holding on, the flower children were kind of holding on to the whole thing, even throughout like the late 70s and 80s and whatnot, into the 80s and whatnot. Like the flower children that were holding on to their whole thing and what I say their whole thing, their whole vibe. So, anyways, that's who he was with, and they had their own little drug selling thing, and he was the one like in charge of psilocybin, and so he was in prison for years for selling that. I think he said by the early 90s he was out on, I guess, good behavior. Guy had quite a story, a few other things in there, but like it. Hold on, yeah, it was just like this thing where he was explaining like all this stuff about his story with that, and he gets into details about oh yeah, he found that it's best if you have like a collective of people involved in trying to help do like this whole meditation frequency alignment kind of thing, where they try to connect with these higher celestial hyperdimensional ultra evolved alien beings, and they would apparently that's a part of like growing off of that. But I think that it's so interesting because it's this life form that discovered some guy, and it kind of just held on to him, but it's a more divine life form. It's not like some mantis or some reptilian that discovered someone and became, I don't know how the process, there's a lot of words in here that I don't know, like where like an entity, like like a hyperdimensional entity comes across somebody, a child or an adult or whatever, and like they just latch on to them. And this happens apparently, but like the ones that got to him were higher celestial beings basically, and they showed him all this stuff over time about the meditative practice and all this stuff. This guy gets into details about his life, his current life in the present moment, and he's this older guy is like meditating for hours every day, and like he would find himself in these deep trance-like states in a higher vibration for these greater beings, and he apparently lived his life for that. Obviously, he had 3 websites about it and looked for other people to bring into the collective. So when I talked to him years ago, he kind of just gave me the whole rundown of his story and everything. And he was the one that was like, oh yeah, love, the love and the divine love is everything at the end of it all. It is when you're holding your existence holds on to that, and that's how somebody lives for eternal existence and whatnot, realizes that we're already a part of eternity and whatnot. And so it was interesting, and like he is the one that opened a lot of doors for me personally to explore different stuff. Obviously, talking to him, I didn't know what they were talking. I thought they were talking about like a whole collective about like waiting for some alien race to pop out of the blue at 1 a.m, and it apparently just goes far beyond. Obviously it was really big into the whole like Terrence McKenna crowd and whatnot, following him and his philosophy and whatnot. And he was really good with words. He's really good, better than I'll ever be with words, obviously. And so I always found that interesting. And there was all this great stuff that they were exploring in this universe every moment in their astral body, and they was so good at it. He could enter and leave just like that. but he said it's so much more to it than processing just simply, emotions and whatnot. And again, this guy opened all these doors to different stuff. I would have never explored, anything at all with, other than like a little bit of like, I guess, like the spirit science stuff and whatnot, and finding that early on, and like a few other subjects in there. But like other than that, like, yeah, he's just simply opened the doors to a lot of stuff for me to look out for. I still sit there and remember the conversation part of it in my head to this day. And boy, this guy like knew how to figure. He had it figured out. He didn't have to work. He didn't have to do anything. His wife kind of took care of him on every way possible, because he just had so much that he had with this energy and these great beings, these great celestial, ultra evolved life forms that he was connected to. So uh, uh, ambitious about. And I really do like that. And there's not a lot of like groups out there that are big into like the whole alien collective, whatever it is, whether it's divine meditative trance like state, or it's just some guy going on about why he's the one, or some guy going on about why he's experienced some great race like the Galactic Federation or something like. There's not a lot of stuff like that out there. And so I find it interesting when there's stuff like this, because I always hoped for my own group. And here, a lot of these people, the guys that have done this, found their own group. He messed with basically Elohim, and I find that's amazing. So, and this guy again said his days were spent just sitting there in a meditative trance-like state, and like just living for the love and the divine love and this great celestial race. I hadn't spoken to him ever since. Probably never will. And this to me is always like the great wise man that actually figured it out, while still having, obviously there's something in there. And I'm only human thinking like this, like anybody, while still having their own flaws. Obviously, I don't agree. They had a really big stance on like, just being closer to like a radical liberal side of things, while still saying, the mainstream is the mainstream and whatnot, but like still standing to it. And it's like I'd almost rather hear somebody like in that level say it's all just a show, it's all just a stage, and that's because that's what politics and all the political hoo-ha in the world, whatever side you are on, that's what it is to me. But like I still think about it, because nobody else that I've ever met has, or talked to on the phone, ever had that kind of these realizations from a greater celestial life form. And so I live to hope one day I'll be in a position like that, where I'm sitting there in a trance-like state for hours at a time, or at least having some close telepathic communication with a great race of beings, a great being of sorts. So that's pretty much it for this. There's a lot more I could go on about them, but it's too personal in their life, and I still consider this guy to be the great wise man of my knowing. So yeah, thanks for watching if you got this far.